said the 200 organisations across the world and more that have been using this. So I guess when we putting DAA on the map in terms of, I think some of the key points for me from today, and then I'll kick it over to you, would be there's a lot of organisations developing capacity in this. It overlaps with a lot of capacities you already have, and as Carl said, it's the extent to which there's this cross-cutting function that would employ this literature in various different types of ways. So many organisations have used it or have developed these capacities for specific issues, or they've developed cross-cutting capabilities. So I guess that would be my first point. I think in each case, certainly in all the ones that I've worked with in Ireland, there was a process where people had to ask, what is this stuff? What can we do with it? And I guess that's what we're talking about today. I will send to Ruan, I'll send him everything that I have, and then he can curate it for you in a way that he thinks is relevant. But certainly, and I'm certainly willing to, if anybody remembered anything I said today and wanted to know more about it, either maybe go through Ruan, and I'm more than happy to follow up with requests for clarifications and so on. So I guess with the spirit of this being T-1, so if we start, maybe if we go just around the table and just a couple of minutes each of general impressions. You can either have one person, and as I said, Ruan will also follow up that if you do have something that you thought was interesting but you don't really want to talk about it now, feel free to do it through that mechanism as well. So maybe start on this table.
I suppose just looking at innovation and the whole area of innovation. Listen, there was a comment here that we're sort of pioneers in this space in terms of some of the things that we've done across the business. A couple of things that spring to mind is plain water. It's a really good, I suppose, innovation that was born within our organisation. Platinum Services has been another one, and an honest, a big part of what we do obviously is very safety focused, and we've done a lot in this space. And one of the other things we're looking at is obviously now this future factory within our organisation, and there's a lot of really good processes now being developed around how we can make better decisions in terms of innovations across our organisation. So listen, it was really
the plain water is great. I'd love to. I've been trying to get one of your folks to give me the data on that. It's fascinating. I sort of it seems to be but it was a very, very interesting one from a behavioural perspective.
It is, but the challenge with that is obviously the plastic bottles. So that's something that we're very focused on.
I suppose one key point there was that I suppose we recognise innovation around the likes of products and that very well. We don't necessarily recognise where we've been innovative around processes or how we do things in the same way, and that maybe that should be recognised in the same way as we do with products and that. So that was an interesting point.
Yeah. In terms of improving decision-making processes around infrastructure and how we deliver it, there's a lot of discussion on that, and win-win is not always achievable in terms of trying to satisfy everybody, because we've got a lot of different dynamics within our organisation. We've got a lot of people that are very commercial focused, a lot of people that are very safety focused and quality focused, and particularly in our area we're very much about quality. And sometimes you're making decisions that are probably not going to deliver the optimum quality, but will definitely give you the best safety outcome. So we need to be better at trying to come up with the optimum solution and agree that in a better way. Consistency of decision making, we feel it's not good. And Vincent, you have some examples of steering groups that we have for some big infrastructure projects where we don't have consistency across the board in terms of how we're making decisions.
It's really interesting one on the noise one, because it took me a long time to get my head around what Cameron was talking about on that one. But the more I've been talking to people about it, they seem to recognise what he means in it, in terms of because you do get so much different views despite the same sort of data coming in. So that's very interesting.
That was the point we made next, like noise. There's a lot of meetings at executive level, at board level, and a lot of different noise, and obviously Brexit is a good example of trying to make decisions and noise, and that is a challenge. But listen, there were some positives. We said, listen, we do use Matrix, in terms of making decisions. And one example of that would have been recently we rehabilitated our main runway here, and we were trying to come up with the optimum surface to put on that runway. And we use, good matrices in terms of clear criteria. We ranked it and scored it, and we come up with the optimum solution. And it was, it was a good example. And the problem is we don't have consistency across the board in terms of, how we do that. Another, I suppose, theme was that sometimes people absolve themselves from decision making. Well, listen, Dalton made the decision. We're all just going to row in behind it. And sometimes you say that that's the decision we're running with, and we don't necessarily challenge it. So, there's certainly something in that. And sometimes we roll back on decisions. And Louise made the example that, listen, we decided that Emirates are going to be relocated from Pier 4 to Pier 3, but we made that decision. That's not for public knowledge, but
yeah, I mean, my ears are closed on anything related to this, so don't worry.
We still haven't followed through it. In terms of improving staff engagement, we said, listen, we need to experiment more and do some trials in terms of, changing things.
Really, it's very interesting what you said about like the innovations in the other areas, and I think that's a brilliant point. It comes across in lots of different organisations. Like, how would you? It's obvious how you sometimes make innovations to different types of products or set processes. Whereas thinking about the store staff piece in that way it's an interesting mindset. Yeah, so it's a very good point.
Yeah, so like, listen, we need to approach change in a different way. Like, we've been doing change, and doing the same things for years, and expecting different outcomes. We're just not. We're not seeing the benefits in terms of there. Simplifying the message and framing it differently is something that we probably need to do more on part of the decision-making process. So there's some problem statement, so it's about making staff part of the change, getting them invested, sitting down, something that I think we're moving into a better space in this area where, we sit down with staff and we define the problem that the business has, and we make them part of the solution. And that's something that I think we're getting better at, but we certainly need to move forward on that. The other point that was made is we don't pay enough attention to the human factor, and people's feelings are more often than not behind our customers and our passengers, and we always put our customer and our passenger, well, not always, but in most instances, ahead of our people. So that's something that we absolutely need to be focused on. We do get things wrong, and there's a lot of talk about Better Together in terms of how that program was. And Better Together was about how we were going to change how we engage with our staff and our unions. We got a lot of things wrong there, and we need to accept that and move it on. And then the last point was that trust is eroded, and in a lot of instances in our engagement with our staff, we're not clear, we're not open enough, and we're not honest enough. And we really need to start moving more into that space of being open and honest. And giving staff visibility of the challenges that collectively we all have across the business.
Great, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. So maybe we could go to that table. Yep.
Okay. Our table, we have quite similar themes that came up. So in terms of the innovation piece, there was a good discussion around the culture and the organisation. So certain parts maybe are more operationally focused, but let's say be more risk averse. So things like health and safety, regulations, security, all those things would be at the forefront of people's minds. So it's much more difficult. Whereas even in the commercial area, they're freed up and we can take a lot more risks. So there's maybe something to think about there about how you could, again, the future factory is a good example of that. And Plain Water came up in the discussion as well. Also, there was an observation where we have done it well. It's been like small groups who've been given kind of autonomy to go and just get things done. Have actually been able to innovate and make change happen a lot more quickly. So that was one of the areas.
That was a great point about the risk cultures in different, and particularly in the airline industry. Like, so I actually need to take that back as well myself in terms of the review I'm doing, because it's there's groups that you would want them to be risk averse, to put it that way, to an extent. But so I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, okay. And then in terms of decision making, again around just having that clarity around what does it take to make a decision. It seems to be that there isn't a consistency there. But when we talked as a group, then there was lots of good examples of when there was projects that actually worked well, or you got to a really good decision in the end. What were the things that really helped get to decision? So discussions around how we future-proofed the project in terms of looking in the long term. We looked at a number of options and really spelled out what the pros and cons of those options were, including doing nothing. Breaking it down, so that you have really clear scoring mechanisms. There's collaboration in terms of discussion, but there's a level of independence as well, which I think came up earlier today, that you need to make sure that the quietest person has a say. But you do look externally as well, so best practice, any external benchmarks that you can do, and also be clear on, are you a fast follower, or are you adopting this early, and having all those things clear in your mind, so that you just have a kind of a good, I suppose, framework to make your decisions.
Great, thank you very much. Maybe we go to this table here. Yeah.
Okay. Our first discussion on innovation, landed us on organisational culture very quickly, and I guess then led us to what could be summarised as negatives. So, like we actually said we focus on the negatives, and that's exactly what we did. So we called out things like we're overly pessimistic, we're risk averse, and we seem to be more comfortable in the kind of under promising and over delivering space. And then our second discussion about infrastructure, I guess the word we discussed quite a bit was around risk exposure, so similar to the previous group. I suppose two items we discussed most is, one is that concept of pre-mortem. I think we're quite good at post-mortem, but pre-mortem is probably a new area for us. And we also talked a bit about opportunity costs. So the famous, we only have 100 million, and the nervousness around should it have been invested in something else. And then the final discussion on the employee engagement. I guess we fast forwarded to actually over here, which are our 10 initiatives that we have in training, and really we landed on the word measure, and how do we measure the success of these 10 initiatives, and simply, is it going to come down to the scores on the survey, or do we need something a bit more deep and meaningful and long lasting? So that was essentially the summary.
Excellent. I mean, I'm glad some people like the pre-mortem thing. I mean, it was. I can send around some templates for doing them. Certainly something. I mean, I'm not operating at the scale you guys are in terms of, but even at the moment we're thinking about launching new programs in my school and so on, and there's a lot of debate about it, and I have to say I find it a very useful just way of thinking. Again, I can't give you a precise number. There's been a couple of sort of reports about the effect it has on decision making, but I think as a structured way of kind of, asking yourself about a big project, I think it's a good one. So just that table there, please.
On the first piece from the innovation, we work fairly quickly around decision-making processes rather than anything else. Probably two or three things that have got a sort of common theme. First of all, the fear of failure, and actually trying to drill a bit where the fear of failure is coming from, and whether that is just something that's just built into the DNA of the company, or whether that's learned processes or whatever. But I think one of the two things we came up with was actually demonstrating learnings from failed projects, which is probably something that we maybe don't do at the moment. And actually a kind of a transparency around, we didn't even call them failures, we call them lost starts. Yeah? But actually there probably isn't a huge amount of transparency on things that do go wrong, and actually taking the learnings out of what the thing that did go wrong that people can pick up on. So I think that was the key.
It's a brilliant point. I mean, you could probably say that about, certainly a lot of my work's been in the public sector, and that's like, that's just universal almost because but I think you've nailed it in terms of that's like really the psychological safety to transparently fail is what a lot of literature has been talking about. So it's a really good point.
Okay, there's a point we got on here that actually could sound quite wrong when you're talking about infrastructure, which is maybe not being 100% correct, but having a really good 80-20 pass and fail rate. Isn't suggesting we want infrastructure to fail. But a measure of the risk aversion again around decision-making processes, but there was actually the point we didn't write down that I think two other groups had, which just around the consistency of the process, is that we don't see that there is 100% consistency around the way decisions are made around big investment decisions on infrastructure. And then the final point was actually, I guess, fairly fundamental, but maybe a bit depressing. The point that you came up with about this really important issue that all the research is showing about even minor differentials on terms of conditions in the same place. Does that actually, it's probably a question back for you, have we actually got a fundamental flaw in the way that we're actually set up?
I think, as I said, we're in T-1, but I definitely think it's something, as I said, not just for you, it's something, like I've been thinking about this across a lot of different sectors, something we have to address in the system. Like there's folks who are disengaging from their motivation to be with an organisation because they feel they're, rightly or wrongly, second class, and I think that that's definitely in the system, and there's a huge literature and there's huge reasons for it, even in animals, never mind humans. So I definitely think we should experiment with, like I was talking to Carl there about like inspiration from the literature. So there's ways you can do things like, if you can change the salary scales, you might have some form of recognition. Look, we know you're on a different salary scale. Here's something else we're doing to let you know that we're taking that into account. I mean, but I certainly think it needs innovation. You look at organisations like teaching, all those areas where you've got these salient differences. It's not a great answer to your question, but I think there's a lot of evidence that we need to experiment with imaginative sort of solutions to that, because it's. The other thing that's coming across a lot, I really like the way that, and maybe that's why they've given him a 7-figure sum to write the book, but Kahneman's thing about noise seems to be sort of resonating across all the groups in terms of like consistency of decision making. Seems to be something that like people recognise, again, not just here, but like in many organisations, like trying to come up with ways that you would have a more templated form of decision making in different areas. So it's something for me to take away and think about, because I mean, I think of the points that I wouldn't necessarily have predicted that would be the point that would have landed, but I think that's it's very interesting that people seem to buy into his idea. His book is out in April, but I'll send Roanne a couple of the articles. They're written for execs. They're not mad sort of academic things. There's like a 4 or 5 page discussion about the role of noise in decision making that we were reading. So, stable.
Yeah. So we've heard future factory mentioned a lot, so thank you very much.
Sorry, what'd you say?
So we've heard the future factory mentioned a lot, and we work in the future factory, so we're happy to.
Oh, brilliant. Yep.
We have something positive, but it's a lot about what was mentioned already. I think the psychological safety for people to kind of be able to feel that they can put forward their ideas and not be afraid of it is really important. And I think it's similar to what you guys mentioned. It's maybe even a false start instead of a failure, but we have to start talking about failure the same way that we talk about our successes. And that will kind of help to, I suppose, bring that psychological safety as well for people. Then when we talk about the decision making, the pre-mortem came up as well. I think it's important as well because some people just learn in very different ways, or people think in different ways, so they might need a bit longer to make a decision, or they want to read a bit beforehand. So the pre-mortem kind of takes that into account as well, and it makes people come to meetings prepared. We also then, when we talk about decision making, we had a bit of a discussion going on here around risk aversion between our commercial and our safety team. But we think it's because we have such a diverse business, it's important that we don't take a one-size-fits-all approach, and that we're a bit agile in how we make our decisions in different areas of the business. And then around staff engagement, we talked a bit about challenging bureaucratic risk. So we talked a lot about the role of the manager, and that a lot of the time the manager is focused on managing upwards rather than kind of focusing on the team, and about making time for people. And I think it's not something that managers don't want to do. It's more like they're so busy firefighting sometimes it kind of slips in between the cracks. So how do we kind of look at the role of manager in a different way to make time for people again. And then one last point is, as a company, maybe not being afraid to highlight the reality of the good work being done. So we talked a lot about Christmas Eve, and it's gotten a very positive reaction, I think, across the board. But as Paul pointed out, that is something that actually costs a lot of money. And I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily for the company to kind of frame it in that way, that we did this because we care a lot about you, but it's not something that was a cheap decision or an easy decision necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, for what it's worth, I practically lived in the airport when I was travelling back and forth to the UK. I think it's a very good airport, if that's not if that's not considered flattery, but I think it is a very good airport. But they're great points. I mean, the thing that I'm going to take away, actually, the one thing I regret not putting in on, because it's come up a few times, is decision making when you've got different risk cultures within an organisation. And I need to think about that. So there's a lot of different decision making techniques around that. So like perspective taking and so on and so forth. So even getting people to role play, right, you're in the commercial wing, now pretend that you were a safety manager for the sake of this meeting and try to see the perspective of the other person, try to structure that a bit better. I mean, you see, I've done a lot of sessions with banks where you've got the salespeople and the compliance people, and they're like different tribes. I mean, they're just completely different groups of people. You'd know by looking at them which were which, like, to be honest with you. But it is fascinating to think about how you make sure that people, because people have different languages, they'll have different parameters, different motivations, and so on. So I said there are decision templates for recognising that, and actually I should have talked a bit more about it in that session, but yeah, in general, it was great points. So the final, last but not least, as they say.
So ideas to improve innovation. I suppose again, we not that we focused on the negatives, but just trying to turn them around. We talked about information sharing versus self-interest, and that idea of kind of business prevention officers, that, you know, it requires a culture where it's baked in, innovation is baked in across departments. And you must be kind of open, honest, and trusting to have true innovation and change things. Again, just the blame culture, if it's there, it needs to be turned down, and again, leading from the top down probably help. Easier processes and initiatives from the management and that structure to encourage innovation and changing the way we do smaller things, not just big things, to get that culture in. Areas of high potential, perhaps in governance and structure, that it's baked into that as well, and perhaps there's an opportunity to reduce the cost base and passenger experience through innovation if it is adopted broadly. Some ideas on the staff engagement. Perhaps consistency in staff engagement. We put down union versus non-union, town hall style, same information across the spectrum, and again, perhaps Dalton's videos working very well, probably more of that, or more consistency, the same consistency, I suppose, across the board. Again, the issues with the accounting beside me is hard to quantify ROI, and that it's hard to measure. It's hard to understand the outcome and get them enforced.
But doesn't mean you shouldn't do the initiatives. I suppose that was the point.
I mean that is a general. As I said, if I had my TED Talk hat on, I could wheel out the sort of McKinsey report from a few years ago that showed organisations that embed behaviour to do better. But like, that's a big statement. Does that mean a particular type of it is associated and so on? So one solution is what Carl was talking about, where you trial it. Sometimes that's going to be feasible. Certainly for a lot of the sort of product processes or services and so on, that's possible. Whereas I've talked about this to a lot of organisations. Like, if you try to do a trial on staff communication, it could backfire really badly. So you're sending slightly differently worded letters to people sitting beside each other at a computer terminal. So I think it's a really interesting point that, and again, my thing on staff engagement was it is more complicated, but yeah, I'll think about that more as well. But go on.
No, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, everyone, thank you. I won't hold you very much longer because it's 20 to 5 and I think you're scheduled to 5, but in my experience, coming up to about 10 to 5 people, they get what I call the ejector seat moment, which is if they had a button that could shoot me through the ceiling, they would happily press it. But I do want to say a couple of things. As I said, organisations have been using this. I think it was very fortunate to have Carl in here as an example of an Irish organisation that they've embedded it in many different ways, as Carl said, either hiring people to work at the area or people that will devote from across different departments some time in it. I personally think you've identified lots of really interesting projects for which there would be, in some cases, fairly rapid ideas, and in other cases, some of these things can take a long time to develop. So I guess what I propose to do is, in my case, I will send on anything I can from what I know to Ruan based on what I've heard today, and that he can then distill in a digestible form to you guys. And as I said, I'm very happy to follow up with any questions you've had. And that's all I have to say. So, excellent. Thank you.